So the title of this presentation is, I can't remember if I said leveling up or level up, but now it's level up. And it's about empowering language learners for success. And it's actually interesting. A lot of what I'm going to talk about touches on stuff that Florencia mentioned, not directly in the same reason, but a lot of things that came up are things you'll see that I'm talking about also. So the origin of the topic that I'm talking about, sort of giving learners strategies. I mean, I don't claim to have started the work on strategies. That's been going on for decades. But the reason I started thinking about it was a project I did a few years ago on Rosetta Stone. So I was comparing Rosetta Stone outcomes to classroom outcomes. And in one of the interviews with one of the Rosetta Stone participants, she said this great thing that became the title of an article, which is, I don't know how to use words in Spanish. So she was saying that she got all the vocabulary and she memorized it all, but she didn't know how to put it together. And so that just really stuck with me and got me thinking, like, we're giving them the building blocks, but, and we all know this, right? You have that student that, excuse me, that studied 12 hours and still failed the test, or that comes and says, I just don't get it, you know, like I'm doing all the work, but I don't get it. And so this is all kind of percolating around this idea that language learners don't always know how to be language learners or how to be good language learners. You know, they can be great students of chemistry and English or whatever, but whether it's because it's language or because they have to study differently, they just don't have what it takes to sort of be successful here. And so that's sort of the background that brings me to this. So this idea of leveling up, I have to give credit to Amy Rosamondo. She's really good at naming things. I'm really bad at naming things. So she's the one who suggested this, this phrasing. And for those of you who aren't gamers, that's where it's coming from. But I have a little bit of background. So look up definition of level up. The traditional sense is to increase or improve something to get it, you know, to be comparable or even with others. The second definition I grayed out there because that's the same thing, just about social economic conditions. But it's this third definition down there, which is to progress to the next level in a game. And I myself am not necessarily a gamer, but I know that it's things like, you know, you need more weapons, or you need potions, or I don't know, you kill a giant or whatever, whatever it is. And so it's that kind of phrasing that I've adopted here. And it's not new. I mean, gaming vocabulary takes over it comes into everyday life. Like, I don't know, I've talked about froggering across the street, if those of you who remember Frogger, or I've heard people talking about Tetrising things into the trunk of a car, you know, trying to get it to it all. So this happens. And in this case, level up has extended into sort of everyday life. This is from a blog, a sort of personal excellence. It's, you know, like coaching, life coaching kind of thing. And she says that when you face obstacles, when you can't get to a goal, it's just because that goal is bigger than you are right now. What you do then is level up. So level up to become stronger. I'm blocking my stronger, better, smarter, whatever it is you need to do. And then you can conquer those obstacles. And so that's sort of the background idea between all of this. We get just these ideas of better, smarter, stronger, improve and progress. And so these are things, you know, we want our learners to do, right? And so if we take all of this goal of just kind of taking it to the next level, our question then becomes, how do we do that, right? Especially for these students we know who have the building blocks and just may not be using them right. And so what I'm going to say is that providing learners with strategies is, if not the way, at least one way that we can help them do that. So second background, previous research on strategies, I said this is not a new idea. It's absolutely not a new idea. This QR code here will take you to like a one-page sample bibliography. I mean, I certainly couldn't include everything and I didn't try. So if I missed something, please don't be offended. I was just trying to cover, you know, starting with late 80s, early 90s with Oxford's work on up until today, just so you can see sort of a sampling of what there is and what I've cited here. But I absolutely do not pretend that this is comprehensive or that I have covered all angles of what is a pretty complex topic in the research. But just to give some background, there's been, like I said, a great deal of work, and there are multiple avenues that people have taken in terms of the research. But I kind of put together some of the main ones that seem to keep resurfacing in one way or another. So one of the initial kind of goals was looking at what kinds of strategies there are, what learners do, and then developing these inventories like the SILL or other sort of questionnaires to see what strategies students employ and why and how. There's also been a lot of talk about, are language learning strategies different from your normal other learning strategies? And then some have made a distinction between language learning and language use strategies. And I'm not actually making that distinction, but it is one that has been popular. Lots of talk, especially in ESL work, more so than languages other than English. Lots of talk about, can we teach strategies? Should we teach strategies? How should we do it? How should we incorporate it into the curriculum? Also investigating factors that determine strategy preference and strategy use, like what is it about the language learner background? Big question, and this is an open question still, is what's the relationship between strategies and sort of your skills or your proficiency? Like, do strategies make you a good learner, or do you use strategies because you're a good learner anyway? I don't know if we can ever untangle that, but situating strategy use within the sort of matrix of individual differences as it relates to motivation, to attitude. There's some work more recently that says that your cultural background kind of determines which strategies you're more drawn to. And then interesting look at, if we present strategies for a second language learner, can they then in their third or future language also use those? Will they be relevant? Will they still be considered strategies from the learner perspective to use? So there's all this stuff, and I'm not answering any of these questions today, but what I will, I have a couple kind of key takeaways that serve as a background for what I'm going to talk about. One of them is types of strategies. My earphones keep falling out, I'm sorry. And I'm using Oxford's classification. There are a number of different classifications, but they do tend to sort of coalesce in some similarities. I'm just using this as a starting point to be able to talk about different kinds of strategies. So Oxford proposes kind of two large classes of direct strategies and indirect strategies. In the direct, and I honestly, frankly, don't entirely get the difference between them because there does seem to be some overlap. Under direct, we have memory, cognitive, and compensation. So memory is, like how you learn and remember new things and getting to connect with old information. Cognitive is what you do to make those connections, analyze, synthesize, evaluate information. And then compensation is when you don't have the word or the comprehension or whatever it is you need, how you go about that. So using what you do have or your old knowledge to help you get through new knowledge. And then on the other hand, the indirect strategies are metacognitive, affective, and social. So the metacognitive is a lot like the cognitive, it's just planning the cognitive. So this is a lot of what we focus on with our learners a lot of the time too, like how to approach new text, how to focus on comprehension, what to do with information as you're getting it. Affective, as the name implies, is more about the emotions, how we can decrease anxiety, how we can motivate further learning, and just sort of that emotional side of it. And then the social strategies are what we do to interact with others, right? And so I'm not, like I said, following this to the T, but it just gives us a framework to be able to talk about it, about strategies in general. And then I just have sort of a list of the takeaways, things we've kind of come to accept based on all these decades of work that I just mentioned. So overall, and there are differences, but overall, it seems that metacognitive, cognitive, and compensation strategies are the most common among language learners, and that makes sense if you think about it. The cognitive and the metacognitive are, how I'm going to get my brain to handle this new language, and then compensation is when I don't have enough new language, what I'm going to do. There is, pretty conclusive evidence that if students use strategies, they are more effective learners. There's a little bit of that chicken egg thing, but when there are studies where we teach strategies to one group and not to another group, the group that had the strategies tends to do better. There is pretty much agreement that strategies are important to talk about with learners and to provide strategies as a part of language instruction. But there is less agreement on how. And there's a lot of people think that, okay, it should be as part of the language course, right? It should be integrated with everything we do. But the challenge with that is that it puts the onus on the instructor. And then the instructor needs to know what the strategies are, how to teach them, when to present them, how to, help learners incorporate them. And that's sort of not necessarily things that all instructors are prepared to do. The other suggestion is that maybe there's this idea for just a separate course on language learning strategies, which sounds really cool. But I mean, if you look at the students in our program who are here to fill their language requirement, I don't see them taking that course. So it's sort of one of those things we all agree it's important, but we're just not sure how to make it reality. And then finally, there's this, I sort of mentioned this before, there's a need for further research on how learning strategies transfer. So can strategies we teach our second language learners help them learn a third language, like I mentioned before, or can they help them with their first language even? Can those strategies, even though they're specific to language, then be applied to other fields? So that's sort of the overview. And like I said, I'm really not setting out to answer a lot of these, but this is the backdrop of what I will be talking about. So I'm focusing the rest of the presentation on three main guiding questions. Excuse me. There. So the first one is if and then how can strategies be incorporated into learning materials to really help our learners level up? The second is then, if so, what strategies are going to be the most relevant to the learners? Like what strategies should we present to learners and incorporate? And then lastly, what do learners think of this? Do they appreciate it? Do they like the strategies? Do they actually use the strategies? So that's where I'm coming from. I'm going to go through each of these one by one, and I'm not keeping track at the time, but I'm sure I'll be fine. So then the first one, applying the strategies to language learning materials. The option that we've taken, and I'm going to be talking about the textbook program that I wrote with Amy Rosamondo and through Lingua Learning. The strategy we took was that sort of first side that incorporated into the learning materials and make it an integral part of the program to sort of alleviate the work on the instructor. We build it into the program, but again, given that it is not very likely that the students would take a whole other course on strategies. So this is absolutely not a sales pitch. So I don't want to go into a great deal of detail about what Contraseña is. It's fully digital. Let me just go to the side. There are a few kind of key pedagogical takeaways that are necessary to understand what I'm going to talk about next. So first, Florencia mentioned this too, that backward design. It's designed around this idea that we start figuring out what we want learners to be able to do. And from there, we go back and figure everything out. So we know what they want to be, what they should do. We figure out how we can assess that. Like, what does being able to do that look like? And then we go back and give them the tools they need to be able to do that. And so you'll see how that is relevant in a minute. Florencia also talked about the flipped classroom, and I say flipped in quotation marks because I think it's funny. It's so hot topic now, but it's, from the advent of the sort of communicative approach, that's what we've been trying to do, right? Like you prepare out of class and you use the limited time in class to actually communicate. So we follow this also. What we do is just make it a little easier, I think, and you'll see in a minute. We just really want to encourage the maximum use of class time. I think Florencia touched on this too. We didn't plan it, I promise. The idea of authentic assessment. So over the years, I've gotten a little, I guess, kind of turned off by this idea that we, the tests we give with, have to memorize every single preposition and verb conjugation, and then the test becomes this way to catch the students in the one thing they didn't remember, as opposed to like, hey, show us what you can do with this. And so we really took that to heart. We designed the program for no tests. I mean, we built tests for people who want them, but the idea is that no, let's show us what you do, and that is relevant to what I'm showing you now too. And then social learning goes hand in hand with that, just because the authenticity, students are doing little projects that they share with their classmates, and then they comment on each other, and then they read their feedback, and so that's all tied into this idea of all of this. And then because it is a digital platform, we do pay attention to those 21st century skills. And that's a whole other conversation, but that in spite of being digital natives, our students are often not as good at things like media literacy, information literacy. There are things that they still need to learn. And I see this in my daughters as they increase in their social media use. They need a little more guidance, I think. So those are the main kind of ideas that go into the pedagogy of the program and where the strategies come into play. And so to give you an idea of what a unit looks like, so how this all comes together, the important part, the bottom is what's done in class. So we wrote conversation activities for class, but what's in the middle there, independent preparation, is what students are doing at home. So really all the learning and the practicing is on their own. The learning is, video tutorials, so they're not reading and all of that. But the sort of bookends here, the project is this unit final little project that they do. And so that's where we started with our backboard design. This is what they need to do to show us that they've accomplished the goals. And then at the beginning, they also get a text which prepares them for that. So either they create their own version of the text they saw, or they continue, something related to it. And so it gives them the model. We break down the little model, this very sort of literacies based, break down the tools that go, or the building blocks that go into that, so that they can then build it up again. So the strategies come into play 3 places. So first, before approaching this text, there's a comprehension strategy. So the projects alternate written and oral, just because we want to be sure to give fair time to develop both writing skills and speaking skills, so that the chapters alternate. But then, therefore, if depending on the modality of this text, right, we get a strategy that's going to prepare them either for listening comprehension or reading comprehension. And I'm going to show you some examples. I just want you to see kind of where they come into play. And then right before they produce their own project, they get a productive strategy. And we actually built this down into dual parts. So for the writing strategy, we give them spelling tips, which seems really obvious, but it's just a little helpful tip, as well as then skills like semantic mapping or kind of strategies to prepare your writing. For the oral ones, we do pronunciation, because as you mentioned, I like pronunciation. I will incorporate pronunciation into everything. And then speaking strategies, and I'll have examples in a minute. So the other part that we do, the cultural exploration, we knew, there's no way I could accurately represent the whole of the Spanish-speaking world, not to mention the fact that every region and city and street and family and person has their own take on culture, right? So we stopped trying to pretend that we can present it, And we have students going out and doing their own research. But like I just said, our students don't always know how to do good internet research. And so we actually build in search strategies there as well. And so those are the three kind of blocks of strategies. Which brings me to the second part, which is how we pick these relevant strategies and what they are and how we make them relevant to learners. So starting first with, sorry, I keep having to move my little images, comprehension strategies. And so these are the receptive. And remember, so I said we have the reading for some chapters and listening for some chapters. And these are just lists to give you an idea of the kinds of strategies we're providing. So somebody mentioned how to use a dictionary. I think Florencia brought that up in the last one too. We do that. We talk about how you use a dictionary. We talk about cognates, skimming, scanning, different textual elements, the headlines and the photos or whatever. For the listening, they're very similar, but predicting information, gestures, what gestures can mean and how that can help you interpret. And I'm seeing myself being very gestury, taking notes, listening for specific understanding, all that kind of thing. And so a lot of these things, we do teach our students. And so some of us do it naturally. A lot of textbook programs do talk about this stuff, but a lot of times it's, little like call out box in the corner where we forget to really cover it, or don't have time, unfortunately. So just to give you an idea of what this looks like, I just picked a sample unit, Unit 8. Unit 8's our food chapter. So the first step is predicting information. And so we give them a little background, and then we do some activities. I mean, not super long or super difficult, but where you put into practice the predicting. These are only screenshots, so you're missing some of the context. But and then we ask them to identify, sort of based on what you've predicted, what's a probable or improbable thing you might hear. And the end of this then is they actually take their first pass at the text for that unit. In this case, because it's food, it's a meal kit delivery service focusing on like comfort foods from the Hispanic world. And so this woman talks about all of this, but we've already predicted a lot of things that they're going to see. And then she's talking about a little competition that their users can submit a video of a meal they made from their meal kit and hashtag ayer comí, yesterday I ate. And then of course that is going to be what their final project is. So it's related like that. So then we come to the production side of it, the end of the unit before they produce their summative assessment. This is how I achieved the goals of the unit. And remember, we had kind of two each. So for the writing ones, we have spelling and then the real writing. And again, just some lists. The spelling is exactly what you'd expect. The letters that are usually problematic, accent marks. We do talk about punctuation because there's one part where they write a dialogue. At the very end, you can see we talk about spell checkers. And we talk about, some ways they're really good and helpful and some ways they're not. For the overall writing, cognates, using structure, we go there, we talk about online translators too, and ways they can be effective, but ways they're really not. So all kinds of just different strategies that would help them accomplish the unit goal. And you'll see, for example, it's in the next one, I think, we try to tie them in to the receptive strategies. So for example, if I think it's here, gestures. So in one of them, we talked about, the person you're talking to or listening to is making all these gestures. And then when at the speaking part, we say, hey, you can use gestures to facilitate that too. So we do try to tie them together there, but pronunciation, again, kind of what you'd expect, sort of problematic sounds, intonation, accent, and then there's a great spoken word poetry text that we talk about, because sometimes that intonation is a little different. And then speaking, again, kind of what you'd expect, how to ensure you're understood, using graphic organizers, all the sort of standard strategies that we know are relevant to this kind of work. So what that looks like then in practice in the same unit, now before they're preparing their final project. So we have the pronunciation. We give them a little description. They have audio that they can listen to. Then we ask them to do usually a discrimination exercise. This isn't hard, right? They should be able to distinguish b from d from g. And it's not, the point isn't that it's hard. The point is that they're actually paying attention to the pronunciation and not, just the meaning, which is really hard. I mean, they're supposed to focus on the meaning. So we just want them thinking about other stuff. Fillers is the kind of strategy for this particular unit. So we give them a list of sample fillers, and we talk about, so what is or in Espanol is like in Espanol. In Spanish is in English. And so we give them a little bit of kind of contrast there. And then to put this one into practice, they actually go back to that original text from the very beginning and go back and listen for fillers that the speaker used. And she did, in fact, use quite a lot on purpose, but they didn't happen to notice it at the time. So it's just going back and saying, hey, now pay attention. And so then just an idea of internet search strategies. These are obviously not language specific strategies. And we go from kind of basic, what are your search terms? Are you going to search in English or Spanish? We get a little more advanced to like the Boolean operators or wildcards, or even using the language or location services to help the results you might get. And then these last two, this is so important, like looking at the results you get and kind of evaluating them. Are they reliable? Are they recent? Are they, real? Or is it some kind of just kind of not reliable personal blog, for example? And that's I think the hardest thing. Like, don't just pick that first search result and run with it. Look through them all, make sure that you know that they're really what you're looking for. And so what that looks like in this unit, for example, so they get there's a little information. It happens to be comfort foods. And then we have sort of informants from around different regions or countries talking about what their comfort foods are. This happens to be a colleague of mine. And then we ask them to go out and search. So this is the strategy. We present it, and then we say, hey, all right, go out and search. We give them guiding questions. We even give them search terms sometimes. But with this strategy, the hope is that, this becomes an activity that is about learning about this culture, but also learning about developing these search skills as well. Okay, so going back just to the Oxford classification of strategies, we really have a little bit of everything. And I am not going to lie and tell you that we planned it that way. We absolutely didn't. But in terms of, what we thought would help the learners, we do have some of everything. There's a lot of cognitive compensation and metacognitive, which is what the research has shown also is sort of the most used. But we do have the memory, the affective, social skills as well. So there's sort of a broad coverage. We cast a wide strategy net, I guess. So that leads us to the third part. I'm doing well. The third part is the student reactions and outcomes. And this wasn't set up as, an empirical study. So it's not like I have a control group or anything. This is just, we were curious about how students would respond to this kind of information. So we did a survey. There's a survey every semester, but in last spring, we asked specifically about the strategies and whether the students found the strategies useful. Yeah, right. That's what I just said. And so there's all kinds of answers, right? I mean, it's certainly not universal, but if we combine extremely useful, very useful, and somewhat useful, we get to 86% of learners did say that they found the strategies useful. I have a little more comment on that later, but so this, I was very pleased by this. It could have gone either way. So, but the fact that they did think, you know, having them was at least facilitating their accomplishment of the goals is nicely reinforcing. But we also then asked which strategies did you like, which were the best, and why, or you know, why did you find them useful? And so I just selected some comments. There are hundreds and hundreds, but they kind of broke down into a few different groups. Some people just answered the question generally. Some people picked out specific types of strategies. So general comments don't shed a lot of light on types of strategies, but do show an appreciation. They're just all so good. All very helpful in different areas. I love this one. They helped me see Spanish as an intellectual activity rather than just rote memorization. So this goes back to my Rosetta Stone student, right, who doesn't know how to use words in Spanish. So we're getting them beyond the words to language, right? They helped me so much. All were equally helpful to become a better user of Spanish. I'm not really sure what that means. And then they helped with the projects, the unit final projects. I'm guessing this one meant the production strategies, but I'm not putting words in anyone's mouth. So there were a number of these that didn't pick out anything specific, but did appreciate that the strategies were part of what they were doing. Some said the comprehension were the most useful, and so some of these are help you build off of what you've learned. So that's that sort of memory strategy. Helps you use context clues if you're lost, which is good. I mean, I feel like that's a big success for students to recognize that. And that goes into that affective too, right? Like, don't freak out if you're lost. Here's how to get your anchor. The one that teaches us how to skim read. I don't think I said skim read. I think I just said skim, but it helps me understand larger Spanish texts. And so this is beginning Spanish, right? So the fact that they can understand that they can approach larger text by using this strategy, I think is really positive. Helped me improve my Spanish. Don't know how, but that's what they said. I like the one about picking out the most important information. So that was one of the listening ones. And it helped me to focus rather than write down everything that's said. And I think that's a huge step too, because beginning learners always want to do that. They want to understand every single word, or be able to read every single word, and getting them to take a step back and say, okay, as long as I understand, that's okay. And then the production, I'd say probably a little more, a few more students said production as most useful. So it showed me how to tailor certain aspects of writing. So, we gave them writing scripts or sort of formulaic things they could use to help them kind of write more or do more. Specific examples on how to speak or write. It's very beneficial. We'll see an example of this in a minute too. The most useful for preparing for the project, makes them easier to accomplish. And that's exactly what we wanted. So I love when students get what we wanted to do. The pronunciation stood out to me as useful. I think this one said pronunciation and spelling. And I think a lot of that pronunciation, especially, we tend to, in Spanish, just push to the side. And so students are always really appreciative when we get to pronunciation. It gives them confidence too, because they're like, oh, now I know how to say this, so I don't feel so silly. The filler words, the one we actually saw, it made my sentences flow more naturally. And so that's leveling up, right? Going from I have two sentences to I can say these two sentences in a way that sounds a little more natural. The note card section. So this was for the oral presentations. We really didn't want them reading, even though that's what everyone wants to do. And so a lot of those strategies were focused on how to make sure you don't have to read. And so one of them was using a note card. But I like it because they specifically said it helped me be less nervous too. So we got that affective side as well. And then we did have a couple that mentioned the internet search activities. I don't know if you saw, but in the question we asked, we really just asked about the comprehension and production strategy. So I think a lot of students didn't consider those, but some did mention it. Useful tips, how to search things, ones where it taught us how to research. So I think they, again, if we had asked specifically about that, we might have gotten more answers, but they do, at least some, recognize that. So one other area I wanted to point out in the strategies, and this goes back to one of one of those takeaways from the research that we have to, that is worthy of looking at how strategies for language learning can relate to other areas or to other languages. So we did have people actually say the strategy sections help me learn skills I can use for any and all my languages. I don't know how many languages this person speaks, but they recognize that it's not just specific to this class. Unique ways to help me remember and master any material. So again, they see it as just beyond Spanish. General strategies that are useful not only in Spanish, but also in English. So again, talking about that sort of L2 back to L1. Reading strategies, I can apply them to other subjects. So these were the comments that I honestly hadn't even sort of thought through transferability of strategies until I read these comments. And I was like, wow, that is really cool that we're giving them tools that they can use beyond the right here, right now. Whether they do or not is an open question. But so then I wanted to provide just a couple of examples of the student work so you can see what it is they're doing and how they are indeed using the strategy. So this one is my absolute favorite. Unit 2 is the sort of getting to know you chapter, and their project is to interview a Spanish speaker. Now it's very clear it doesn't have to be a native Spanish speaker. It can be another learner. It can be heritage learner, speaker, but somebody who speaks Spanish. And so for the strategies for that unit were how to express if you don't understand, which is important, and also how to make sure you can make yourself understood. And so this, let's hope my internet still works. Are you seeing the internet or you're only seeing the, hold on. Sorry, hold on. I got all switched up. I think I'm just going to share my desktop, and then are you now seeing a video?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. So
yes,
this is Phil. I'm sorry. I'm going to stop again and make sure I shared the audio. Sorry, technology. Okay. So this is Phil. He's a retired gentleman who is taking Spanish through distance learning. And I don't think he was very thrilled with the idea of having to go interview a Spanish speaker. But this is, even if you don't speak Spanish, I think you'll get this. It's relatively short, and I'm going to play the whole thing.
Hola, ¿cómo te llamas?
Mi nombre es Martín, señor.
Martín.
¿Cuál es su nombre?
Mi nombre es Felipe Howen.
Okay.
¿De dónde eres?
Yo soy de México, del estado de Guanajuato.
Sí.
¿Y usted?
Usted, yo soy de norteamericano, de Cleveland, Ohio.
Oh, ok, mucho gusto.
¿Cuántos años tú vives en Estados Unidos?
En Estados Unidos tengo más de 30 años.
Sí.
¿Y usted, toda su vida aquí?
No, yo nacida en Estados Unidos.
Okay.
¿Qué vendes tú?
Yo vendo ropa vaquera.
Lo siento, no. ¿Qué significa ropa? Ah, sí,
Sí.
sí.
Botas.
Y botas, sí.
Sí, ropa.
Muchas gracias. ¿Cuántos años trabajo aquí?
Aquí solamente tengo 5 meses.
Ah, sí.
¿Usted trabaja todavía?
No,
No.
no trabajo, soy retirado.
Oh, ¿cuánto tiempo?
2 meses,
¿Solamente 2 meses?
solamente 2 meses.
Usted debe extrañar su trabajo.
No trabajo
Ok.
para mí. Final pregunta.
Sí, señor.
¿Quién es su cliente favorito?
El señor Felipe va a ser mi cliente favorito.
Excelente. Muchas gracias.
De nada, señor. Mucho.
Okay, so I don't know why the volume was so low. I hope that you could hear okay. That wasn't perfect, right? There were a lot of mistakes, but he had a conversation. When he didn't understand, he asked a question. He I don't think he understood a lot when he was like, see, but he was expressing his understanding, even if it may not have been all really understood. Especially because the other gentleman actually spoke pretty natural Spanish, right? He didn't slow down too much. So anyway, I love Phil. Turning to a written project. Unit 5, the goal was to write a letter nominating someone for a prize. And it was basically, because we were working on personality, character traits. And so for the production, we gave them characteristics of formal and informal letters that they could use. And Claire nominated her mom. And so she wrote this nomination. And so you can see for Spanish speakers, this language is not language of beginning Spanish students, right? But we gave them the chunks that they can use, and then how to close the letter. And so it's, to some extent, these chunks are things she just put in there without understanding, but that's what language is. I mean, when I write a business letter, I say things that, aren't attached, please find. I learned that from someone, and I don't speak like that. But so it's, it's realistic. And so she wrote this very nice letter nominating her mother, which is sweet. Then Unit 8. So this is the one we actually looked at, right? Where the project was describing the meal they made or ate and, contributing to that contest. The production strategies we gave them were pronunciation and filler words, the and so we have Dylan. Dylan is very excited.
Hola, hola, señores y señoritas. Bienvenido a mi.
Okay, I'm gonna go forward a little bit just because he makes a point of using some of the fillers, but we don't have to watch the whole thing. Okay, let's go there.
Grasoso. Bueno, hoy.
So he says bueno. He makes the point of including that. Later, he has a pues. I think he might have done an haber also. So, he got those into the project as we taught them. He used them. And then the last example from Unit 9, this one is the sort of health chapter where the main text the students saw were infographics about, one was about like preventing the flu and one was about stress and anxiety. And so as their own project, they had to create an infographic about some aspect of mental or physical well-being. And the strategy was using visuals to enhance your work. So we didn't just talk about, the right visuals, we talked about copyright and fair use and all of that also. And this one I will make a little bit larger so you can see. Obviously, for the last year and a half, we've gotten a lot of infographics about COVID, but again, this isn't perfect, right? There's some spelling problems, but the accents are good because we had accents as the focus as well. but there are images that correspond. They're maybe not the images I would have chosen, but they, they help enhance what the text is, exactly what we had asked them to do. So that to me is what is the most rewarding. It's one thing for them to say they like it and to say they use it, but to actually see them putting those strategies to use in the work they create was, to me, very meaningful. So, conclusions. Going back to the main questions, how can strategies be incorporated into the learning materials? So what we did, we made them an integral part of the program. So there's a structure section, a vocab section, a culture section, a strategy section. They're just like any other section. They're consistent. Every unit had those three, and it's intentional. I was trying to figure out how to describe it. This is like the training we get at work, just-in-time training. We tell them what they need when they need it, which is, I guess, a far cry from that ideal course on learning strategies. But I feel like it's probably a little more realistic to expect of our learners. What I did not mention while I was showing you these projects is that the rubric we provide for grading the projects has a specific part asking if they incorporated the strategies or not. And so it is graded, which is probably why they use them in their projects. But same as anything else, we expected the project to include cultural information relevant to what we learned in that unit. We expected the corresponding vocabulary items to be used. And so we expect this to be used also. And that goes back to treating it as any other building block, right? For learning languages. What kinds of strategies? So as you saw, we had a little bit of everything. We used both indirect and direct. The ones that seemed sort of easier for students to incorporate were the cognitive and metacognitive, as well as the skills-based. I mean, we never actually grade someone's pronunciation if they don't do it right, but just showing that they are conscious of it. And it does seem like when we're able to make the closest connection to the learning objective, like when the strategy directly feeds into the project that they're doing and they can see how it is immediately going to help them, that seems to be when they incorporate them the most and are the most meaningful to them. So how do they react and implement? So again, I thought the reactions we got were quite positive, better than I had hoped for, to be honest. The comments indicate that they really appreciate how practical they are, which is, again, a way I think that idealized strategies class might not be as relevant, because you really need to be using it for it to make sense. So they get the strategy, they're able to put it to work right away, and so they get how practical it is. Comprehension and production were valued equally, it seemed, and again, they were incorporated intentionally into the projects, albeit under duress of grades, but again, I'm okay with that. So then, just by way of a few conclusions, I think we've shown how strategies can be effectively incorporated. They are appreciated by students, and they do seem to help lead to positive outcomes. Again, I don't have like a control group or anything, but watching the students make the effort to use them, the projects are good quality, well, acceptable quality. The ones who use the strategies, it looks like they kind of did really well. Some questions remain. How to encourage more widespread incorporation. So some of the comments I got, which I didn't mention, were, I don't know what strategies are, or what strategies are you talking about? So not everyone realized what we meant, I guess, when we asked the question. Some people said grammar, and that was not a strategy. So I mean, some may have misinterpreted the question. Some people used the opportunity to tell me how much they hate a language learning requirement. So I mean, like we got a little bit of everything, but there was also a couple comments about how they weren't assigned to them, or one response was like, we never did these. My instructor never mentioned these, but I came across them one day and I really thought they were neat. So if we're still viewing it as that call out box at the top of the page and ignoring it, we're not doing the justice to our students. Again, this relationship between the strategy use and the outcomes, I was talking about the people who were using the strategies had pretty good projects, but maybe they were going to have good projects anyway because they were good students, and good students just naturally use strategy. So again, I don't know that we can tease that out really, but it's an open question. What I wonder is how applicable it is beyond the unit or the project. So some students, I did notice, like in my own classes, they would incorporate a previous strategy into their next project. And some of them are really useful, like note cards or whatever. What I don't know is, are they doing that in conversation work in class? Are they, but we see that all the time, right? You teach the grammar point and they do it right, and then they turn around in conversation and do it wrong again. So I mean, I think that's part of the learning process, but I'm curious how it comes into play in their everyday language. And again, that idea of the transferability, those few comments from the students that I gave them tools to use in other disciplines or beyond this class that was really interesting to me, and I'd love to see how that works if it really does transfer like that. And then with 3 minutes to spare, I'm done. So I think I can stop sharing.
Yeah, I think you can if you want. I am. Please, if you have questions, you can use the chat, or maybe if it's possible, we are not that many in the room, but if you want to say something. So Anne Violin is raising the hand already. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm going to Anne, go ahead. You can, and then Mary Ellen is going to be the second. So after Anne. So go ahead, Anne. Your first question.
Thank you for this talk. That was really, really interesting, I thought. I'm wondering if you heard anything from the instructors and how the instructors reacted to including these strategies, and if they thought that they saw a difference in their student production, or how they reacted overall.
That's a really good question. And we didn't ask the instructors, but we should, you're right. I know anecdotally, just talking to other instructors, that, oh, it's really cool that they do this, but I never asked specifically. And now that you've said this, I'm embarrassed that I didn't think of it. So we'll add that to the next survey.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Exactly.
And I can't wait to hear the results also, because I wonder if there's some reinforcement during class of those strategies, and therefore there's even more buy-in, or how they react to that. So
no, you're totally right.
I'm curious to hear that.
Yeah. Great question. So Mary Ellen, you want to ask your question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Lord. It's really nice to see these integrated across like a section of the curriculum, because I think I do it just sporadically when I perceive the need. But of course, if it's kind of just part and parcel, yeah, that would be useful.
Right. It's not your responsibility then to, remember to do it or know how to do it. Or
Absolutely. So one of my questions is, and maybe I missed this, but can you talk about how much of the curriculum does the program that you showed us cover in terms of semesters? And B, if these strategies were to kind of get carried across more of the curriculum, would you imagine the strategies themselves maybe becoming more detailed or complex, or would you imagine more of like a reinforcement of the same strategies, but just at different language use levels?
So yeah, that's a really good question. The material it's 24 units, which is enough to cover 4 semesters. And the strategies, so the internet strategies are repeated. And so, I think we had like 8, and so we repeat them because they're always relevant. And I do think they need reinforcement, just like we talk about recycling other language material. The up through unit 18, they're all new strategies. But that it's a really good point, because I feel like we need to be overt about saying, but don't forget about what you did before. And then in the last 6 units, we sort of provide reminders to them about the strategies, but I do think that they could be more intentional at the end, especially where, you know, they are starting to get pretty decent language skills and produce pretty decent projects, where they could actively try to incorporate more than one, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. And even thinking about too, I don't know what it's like in your program, but thinking about for the students who do choose to go on, do these get reinforced or developed further beyond the fourth semester as well? So anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? I think I have some here, a couple in the chat. It says, Christine is asking, thank you very much. Would you share an example of a rubric grade that requires the use of the strategies?
Ooh, I don't know that I have any here, but it would, so the rubrics are, you know, divided by points with descriptors. And so one of the sections is student made an effort to incorporate Spanish like fillers. And then there are, you know, they did, like Dylan said, bueno, or, you know, if they had English fillers, you know, they said, there's fewer points there. I can, if you shoot me an email, I can show you some of the rubrics, because I think it would take me a long time to log in and show you now, but I'd be happy to share one.
What's the weight that it carries to have the strategies? It's considered. Do you remember by any chance?
I don't remember. I should. It's not as much as sort of the language building box. And you know, the rubrics are modifiable, so I'm sure some instructors just take that part out. But I want to say like 10%.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's hard to assess, right? Like, how do you assess they pronounced, or they made an effort to pronounce the R right or whatever? So it's more honestly about making them think about it than the actual points.
Yeah, I guess if you put it there is that's by putting it there, it serves a purpose already, right?
Exactly.
Students are already thinking that, well, I might be, you know, I need to do that, right? That's part of the performance. Yeah, that's okay. So let's see what's it says here. I think I don't know if Damaris has a question. It says the students apply the strategies in the oral projectos. We use Contraseña at my institution. They are encouraged to incorporate them, and also there are conversation activities that you can do in class. Okay, right. So someone is
that's true. Hi, Damaris, the former student. But yeah, so there are activities, the conversation activities that ask them to sort of overtly think about the strategies and practice using them. Thank you for that reminder.
Okay. So are there any other, I have a couple of questions, but I don't want to prevent someone else to do it. I mean, are there any other questions that you can put in the chat or ask directly?
I've stunned you all into silence.
So if you, while you think about your questions, I would like to ask you something that made me think, think that maybe you know more about it. I don't know. I mean, don't you think that once you learn a strategy, I mean, once you learn to skim, a text, or once you learn to, I don't know, to say some words like, I don't know, bueno, or that's, or like, right, in English, it is, I mean, I don't know if, I mean, I don't know anything, but intuitively you use it. In the next time you read a text, you tend to use it, don't you think? Like, it is not necessary. Is it necessary to be reminded, to use a strategy, or once you use it, you have it for life, is what I'm saying, like kind of thing, because I mean, as long as you encounter the situations in which you could use, once you learn them, don't you think? I don't know. What's your take on that?
So it's a really good question, and I feel like for those sort of gifted or dedicated students, probably. But I've also seen, I mean, we've all seen this, right? Where students forget that in English, you see a newspaper and you read the headline and look at the picture to decide if you're going to read the story. So those skills that we naturally have in our first language, it just doesn't occur to them to use them in the second language. but I think you're right. So some of them like the gisting or that kind of thing may be more natural, but I feel like in a lot of ways, I feel like we're recreating the wheel every single time.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, and we assume that's why it's so important, this stuff, because we make so many assumptions that they would know, right? And they don't. Actually, they don't. We have forgotten how it is, when we were actually learning, right?
I used to joke that if we handed our students a phone book, they would literally start reading it, because they think, okay, words on a page, I have to read it, instead of saying, what do I do with a phone book? I look up one thing. Or for those of you who don't know what a phone book is, that's what we used to do before the internet.
Okay, so Bobby has a question. Yes, Bobby.
Hi, yes. So mine is really more of a comment, kind of following up on your question, Claudia. And incidentally, Gillian, I do know what a phone book is. I even know what it means to dial a number, to dial a number. Yeah, so I'm telling on myself. But Claudia, thank you for that question. And Gillian, also, thank you for what I thought was a very thought-provoking and a very important presentation, because I think far too often we as educators neglect those pieces that that help students to make connections, the metacognitive pieces, and we just assume that they go from one experience to the next and they string everything together very nicely, as if it's a necklace, and the end result is this beautiful necklace, but they don't often have the string or the thread that helps them to keep those things together. In response, Claudia, to your question, I can't, thanks, Hobgood 2021. Claudia, I can't speak to your question, and I'm remiss, I'm sorry for the study, but I know there's been some meta-analysis that looks at, in K-12 education, the use of literacy strategies consistently, starting in middle school, actually even before middle school. We start teaching, general literacy strategies, right? But then in high school, something happens when students start to go off into different subject area courses, right? So it's no longer, we have Miss Fernandez all day long, but we've got Miss Fernandez, we've got Miss Lord, we've got, whoever. And so those strategies are no longer taught as much with the same amount of frequency and I guess the word is intentionality that we would have at the high school level. And what I recall from this meta-analysis is that because those strategies are no longer explicitly taught with intentionality, it's like you were saying, Claudia and Gillian both, students forget that they learned them. And so there is not that transference from what they had learned in middle school or maybe even elementary school and application of those strategies. And so it's something that I'm keenly interested in as well. I'm at the university level, and I'm wondering to what extent students who are in my French course are transferring any skills that they brought with them to the university, and likewise any skills that they may have from other courses. You see what I mean? So I think, again, obviously I'm very impassioned by this, but it's an important and interesting question. And I do firmly believe, though, that the onus is upon us as educators to explicitly teach those strategies. But I again go back to Gillian, what you said, like, do we really need to have a course on this? Is there room for a course like this? And if not, then how do we ensure that someone who exits from a particular program has those strategies so that they can become more self-directed as a learner?
Yeah, exactly. Yes, because that's maybe the ultimate point, I guess, right? So they are able to use them after they finish the requirement, the language requirement. Thank you, Bobby. So I have one question here at the chat from Anne Becker, and says, thanks for this presentation. Could you talk about how you train instructors or TAs to use the program to full advantage?
I no longer train our instructors and TAs, but I think in terms of, well, just like with the strategies, it's really a question of making explicit the why. Just like we have to explain to our students why you're learning this strategy. I think if our instructors understand that we include this so that it'll help that or whatever, that I think that is the underlying key. But we also, that's sort of, at least in terms of the strategies, that was sort of the idea, is that not everyone knows strategies, or I forget who said it now, but that, we do it sporadically as we think of it, but so that we're kind of trying to take it was Mary Ellen, I think, right? Try to take the onus off of the instructor to have to know one more thing. So my suggestion would be just do it as it's written, but I know not everyone does that.
Yes, yes, exactly. That's another story. How to train instructors to use the materials or the things, the components in the program in an effective and efficient way, right? Yeah.
And to recognize that it's not just grammar, vocabulary, and tests or whatever, that those other parts. And I beat this drum about pronunciation too, that it's really important to include that, even though we don't always think of it, giving them all the possible, to use our gaming analogy, like all the tools and the potions and because they never know what they're going to need. And so if the most they have, then.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if there are some other questions. Are there any other questions? I don't see any hands, but we have some time. So I wonder that, that at least for my program, and I guess it is for everyone, that students are very much into grade oriented, right? They do things because, they want to get a good grade or they are very worried about it. So I was thinking, as you were talking, that if it would be an effective way to put the strategies along with the rubrics, we expect you to accomplish the intention, right? Like to respect the intention. So you have to actually write a letter, or you have to actually, get the interview going. So along with this expectation, you can put next to the rubric, I guess, I don't know, maybe it's too much, maybe it's too busy, but what you can do to accomplish this part of the rubric, because then it's going to say, okay, so I want to get this. So how am I going to, what can I do, right, to enhance this thing that the professor is expecting from me, right? Or in my rubrics, for example, has comprehensibility, right? So you have to be comprehended. So next to it, say, how am I going to do that? Well, these are the strategies that you can use to make yourself comfortable. So maybe it is going to be too busy. We put it in the rubric, but I think that's a way in which you can really make the students. Of course, there should be fewer strategies, not the whole gambit, but at least one way to be comprehensible is this, right? And then you can say, well, then I think it will be effective. I don't know what the rest of you guys think, but maybe it will be more effective because they are so much into how am I going to be evaluated.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. We have like a level up column on the rubric, right? How you can do that.
Yes, exactly.
Maybe it's not the rubric. Maybe it's like not the actual rubric. Maybe as you present whatever task it is, you say, these are the things you're going to be expected to do. What building blocks do you need? What strategies can you use?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it seems very basic, but I think that kind of overt reminder would indeed be useful to students.
Yeah. Some students ask, how can I be successful in this class, right? Well, maybe this is one of the ways in which they can have the information, right? And it's relevant, right? You are giving it when they really need it, right? I guess, I don't know. Okay, so we have 15 minutes left, but we can, I don't know if someone wants to, thank you so much for this presentation, this plenary speaker. This plenary was, very informative, and I'm sure people think the same thing. Are there any other questions, final questions that you want to ask to Gillian Lore before we go to the lunch break? We want to say thank you. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. Yes.
And thank you, Claudia, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here.
It was a pleasure, and we are very lucky to have you. And you say yes. Yeah, we wanted. You were. It was. Your name came first, and we got it. So it was. We were very lucky. We were like crossing our fingers that you were available and willing to do it. So thank you so much for this time. Thank you very much for this informative presentation.